I think what I would say, though, is on the OT side of the house, we're not seeing a lot of that traction per se.
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, I'm Craig Duckworth.
And I'm Dino Busalaki.
So I think today, Dino, I'd like to talk about two things. But before we start, I don't know if you saw it. I know that Armis, one of the technology vendors we work with, raised another $435 million yesterday, which put them at a $6.1 billion valuation. They just announced in August that they're at 300 million ARR. So these vendors that we work with, on a side note, are rapidly growing. This is becoming a quickly adopted industry, which is huge. So I just wanted to give a real quick shout out on that, just from a size and scope, and make sure everybody was aware of that.
That's great news. And I think it's showing that this industry is starting to move in a positive direction. I think what I would say, though, is on the OT side of the house, we're not seeing a lot of that traction per se, right? And we've talked about this many times before, that companies that have invested in tools like Armis or Clarity, for example, and have had them for years, they're only picking up, a subset of their assets in their manufacturing environment. They're really not getting what I like calling the last mile, which is where we live and breathe as an engineering organization. And we've had the back and forth on, how do those IT executives and leaders start building bridges to their OT ecosystem supply chain?
Totally agreed.
Right.
As we talk about, this process, I really want to focus on the human element or the lack thereof. We've talked in the past about the silver tsunami, and I can see your hair is as white today as it ever is. So that's part of it.
Thanks, Craig.
But
I'm
again,
still young at heart.
That's what counts, right? So, but as the aging workforce, especially in manufacturing, which is higher than traditional industries, it's going to be important because there's going to be a very large loss of knowledge transfer as these retiring individuals start leaving the workforce. What's your thought on that? How can organizations begin trying to protect that now? And what does that look like? Where would you say the most dangerous place in the plant would be? Is it the retiring person? Is the person that has all that knowledge from working there 50 years that's now going to walk out the door?
No. And obviously that is a challenge. I think most organizations recognize that, right? I mean, I got to believe their people team and their leadership team recognizes the demographic and the age of the folks they got working for them, and those that are approaching retirement age and where they're positioned within the organization. What happens when those folks leave? And we both know that the life cycle is very different for industrial control systems and manufacturing space compared to the IT space, right? Laptops around 3 to 5 years, control systems around are measured in decades. And so there hasn't been a lot of capital investment on life cycle replacement, moving that needle forward, where you're still dealing with very old technology, but yet it's been connected over the last 2 decades, last 10 years, COVID. We've seen this mountain of remote access for a whole wide range of reasons, whether it be business related, support related, people can't travel related, that have visibility and access into those environments. And what organizations haven't done is shored up, what is that cybersecurity in that plant? What does it look like, right? Meaning, we always say, think globally, act locally, right? IT is more of a centralized organization in the way that they operate and the way they're put together, versus OT, which is very decentralized, right? And so if you're looking for where is that odd end server that's out there, how are these VLANs connected, what kind of changes are made during different production cycles and line changeovers, that activity at that plant level is how do you tap into that, right? That's what's going to happen as these guys retire and leave, is understanding, the inner workings of these plants, right? And the assets that are in, right? And I'm one of those, right? I mean, I've lived through, you know, all the way back to the early 90s, and you think about, you know, how we started with mechanical systems that were air gapped to moving towards connecting them, and then the Y2K, you know, preparations, and then living through the whole .com thing, and then going through the COVID connectivity. There's a lot of knowledge, you know, in these environments, and bringing somebody in that's young, you know, where I've seen young, you know, engineers or plant people go into a plant and walk up to an HMI that's a panel view and treat it like their iPhone and trying to, you know, move the screens to scoot around. It's like, what are you trying to do? And it's like, well, I'm trying to expand it and flip through. That's not how that damn thing's older than you are, you know?
Yeah. And I get it. And I see the same thing, but you know, I think it's going to be important as the industry is starting to tackle these challenges. You know, the younger workforce are all accustomed to their iPhones that expand and contrast and move and all that stuff, where, you know, maybe there should be I think of an apprenticeship or a co-op or something like that, where the young are starting to migrate in, and their skill sets are different than that of some of the exiting, retiring older generation.
Well, I think part of them need to come out of the industry per se, right? I mean, even if you go back to the networking, and I can go back as far as when they broke up Ma Bell, which really started the foundational aspect of the internet being used more commercially, and all that talent come pouring out of, you know, Ma Bell at the time and all the technology. But those were folks that worked in the industry, and then organizations eventually were able to grow and hire talent to come and help and build enterprise networks, right? And I think the cybersecurity on the plant floor is going to have to be the same. I mean, the question, who owns cybersecurity in the manufacturing plant? And I would say no one and everyone. Right.
It has to be treated like safety. It's got to be everyone's responsibility. And right now, again, I say this all the time, there's a lot of people with responsibility for that security and almost no one with authority for that.
And the reason why they don't have authority is because they don't understand the inner workings of how that plant operates to produce the goods that generates revenue for the organization well enough to be able to work in there without being disruptive, right? To be able to do the things they want to do in order to improve the cybersecurity posture, shore it up, and at the same time, not slow the plant down, knock the plant down, or, you know, how many times have we heard cybersecurity in the plant? It just gets in the way of getting things done, right? Especially when it's coming from somebody outside dictating to something they know zero about on how this machine or these process centers work within this plant. You know, you have to speak their language, which to me, it goes back to the OT ecosystem has to get better at this. They have to start driving this narrative because that's who these plants trust. It's who they work with. It's who they buy from. It's who they look for support when things aren't going well. If my drives aren't running well to keep my packaging line running most effectively, and a lot of these organizations don't have controls engineers on site anymore. They got operations people. But if they need somebody to help them program their PLCs and determine, why aren't my, frequency drives working correctly, they're usually reaching out to some engineering firm to help them with that. Right. So that talent isn't even necessarily in the plant, let alone how am I going to provide security around that without being disruptive and be able to do things that are actionable to help me improve my cybersecurity posture.
It leads me to think that, is the OT industry leaning toward more of an IT model of outsourcing and not so much having it all in-house,
Yeah, I think you have a point there, back to the resource issue.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to find this talent?
Right.
They know how to do this. They're not just out there on the street waiting for you to call them. You're going to have to grow them. And then how do you grow them when you really don't have a good strategy or plan in place? Or your IT team is the one that's managing it, but they don't have an operational background, production background, process background, right? And so how do you fix that, right? And so your best bet, if I'm a CIO or a CISO, and I have large or medium-sized manufacturing, I'm tapping in to who my plants are using and relying on and supporting them and helping keeping these plants running to determine what kind of practice do you have, what kind of resources do you have, what kind of partnerships do you have in regards to my strategy around cybersecurity. Back to, I have the responsibility, I'm working my way towards authority, but I got to get plugged into the people that are really helping drive that, because the plants aren't necessarily driving it. They're just end users, right? Yeah, predominantly, they're just end users.
Mm-hmm.
The people that design and build the machines it's like a car. You buy the car, you're the operator of the car to use it for however you see fit, or a truck, but you're not the one that built it. Right. You're not the engineering team that built that vehicle to do what it needs to do, right? And that's the people that IT hasn't gotten their hands on yet to help them with the plan and strategy that they're trying to pursue.
Yeah, no, I see that, and I think that's definitely plays into it. But again, it's bigger than that. I think it's industry wide. It's how do you help articulate the real risk and measure with dollars and cents and equate that to organizational risk to get that buy-in and to get that authority for making changes on the plant floor. A lot of times it's seen as, well, you need $50 million to do whatever you want to do, or $1 million. And we see no return on investment. But to say, hey, if you spend $100,000 and we protect $2 million worth of revenue by doing whatever this is, by securing this packaging line or reducing risk for this filler or whatever that task is, C-level understand that number, that metric. If I spend $100,000 to save $2.5 million, that's a no-brainer. I'm going to say, here you go, run really quick. Is there any other ideas like that you can give me to spend more money?
Yeah, well, and that depends on how good they are tracking their OE, right? How, their MES systems that they might be using to be able to determine what that metric is, what an hour downtime costs me, and how much downtime do I take that's due to the ghost in the machine, versus something that was planned, or, the machine just broke, or there's some regularly scheduled maintenance, we lost power, those are identifiable. But what about the things that are unidentifiable that cause that, right? That's human error, changes to the control system somebody wasn't aware of. Maybe he's pilfering around inside your network somewhere and being disruptive to those control systems. To be able to task that back to your point to say, look, there's a black hole in the middle of my plant. I sunk $10 million into it last year, and I don't know why. I can't put a metric on why I lost several $1 million in production and opportunity cost in that plant, right?
Yeah, let's look at some of the other stats on the aging workspace within manufacturing. A couple things that I found interesting, that 82% of the labor force that left manufacturing for all reasons were for retirement. 82%. Not turnover, not going to another job, simply retiring. That's alarming to me. To me, that should be a wake-up call to how do we get younger talent, either from the education system, the schools, from trade schools, into this area to start supplementing, because if not, there's going to be an even larger talent shortage in there. There's got to be some time window to transfer that knowledge over.
Well, I don't know if this is unique to the United States versus overseas, right?
Right.
Maybe they're not having the same problem. What I will say is that it's very hard to get the younger generation to go work in an industrial environment that's kind of old, right? It doesn't have great technology, latest technology, right? It does what it does. I used to work in the beer industry. If you wanted to be the greatest networking guy, to build global enterprise class networks, then go work for a company that does that. We make beer.
Yeah, no,
and so if you have that mindset, from a manufacturing standpoint, that we make widgets, we're not in the technology business, then, you're not going to attract the talent that you're talking about. The only way to do that and be effective at it, even to protect your older systems, you're going to have to go outside and bring somebody in that does this as part of their practice, right?
Yep.
And some do, right? The IT they've done this for decades, right? They go out and find organizations to help supplement and or run complete applications or the infrastructure or portions of the enterprise, whether it be maintenance, support, development, whatever it might be. And they've leveraged that. We haven't seen that in the manufacturing space, except for the engineering teams. They're out there helping them with the machine centers that are being designed and built, maintained, and support.
Yeah.
But they're not bringing their A game when it comes to cybersecurity around those control systems, right?
Right.
They're not doing that. And we know that because we're in this industry. We have these conversations, and it's at all different levels, right? You know, until you get to the point where you have a manufacturer who's working with an integrator or an OEM, and if you don't have the right boxes checked for them, meaning that you have partnerships with the Armises and Clarities and the Ciscos, right? Around just using those as examples. You don't have a practice. You're not implementing the types of technologies that help me improve my cybersecurity posture. I'm not buying from you. I got to go find somebody who does. I actually heard that from an OT cybersecurity guy from a very large organization. Basically, they're to that point. If you as an OEM who might have the coolest machine in the world we really would like to have, but if it doesn't meet these specific requirements, because he was talking about a machine that they had bought just a year or two ago that came in with Windows 10 on it, right? And what it was like within 6 months, the OS was going to expire. And I've seen this before. That's not the first time I've seen this. You know, they're like, "Are you crazy?" And it's like, yeah, those guys are still selling that stuff, and their company is still buying it.
Yeah,
you know, and that's back to responsibility and authority. You know, where somebody comes in with a hammer and says, "Let me review the technology that we're buying on this machine." You know, it's like buying a car today, and you know, it doesn't have certain safety precautions on it. You know, there's no seatbelts, you know, no horn, no headlights,
and an 8-track tape player.
You know, we're only going to drive it during the day, and you know, we're driving at 10 miles an hour, whatever. But my point is that you're not going to buy that vehicle, right? And but we still have manufacturers that buy equipment that is out of date before it even lands in the plant.
And that's a fault, though, Dino, I think, of the industry. These tools and technologies are designed to last 20, 30, 40 years. If I'm making a plastic blow molder or whatever it is, and I make this in Italy, and I'm the only one that makes it, and I want to change my processes once every 10 years because I freeze the technology, I freeze the components, I freeze all the stuff, and I make stuff for 10 years, and that's all. It's the exact same thing for 10 years, the same product, everything. And then, like in year 8, I start trying to figure out what's my next evolution. And then I migrate over, and then I set all of that in stone, and I go from Windows 7 to Windows 11, but I forget all the stuff in the middle, because I'm not going to change my process because I'm the only one that makes this thing and everybody has to use it and I don't really care.
Yeah, well, that can and does happen, right? I think it's less and less of that, you know, where somebody's got a chip on their shoulder that says, "I don't care about your cybersecurity challenges and problems. You want my machine, buy it. If not, I got 5 people standing behind you that will." You know, versus, you know, if you had an engineering team like we used to have back in the day, you go build your own damn machine. Right? You can do it. It can be done. Or you go find somebody. You can build it yourself if you got somebody, but you know, that's playing that card of, you know, my extruder that I make for, you know, plastic blow molders, to your point. I'm not messing with it, changing anything around the operating system I'm using, the PLC that I'm using, or anything from a networking. I'm still putting in a dumb layer 2 switch it in. I'm still running Windows 7. You know, all the goofy, crazy stuff we still see. And, you know, and so how do you move forward? You know, if you're not going to make capital investments, you know, in your manufacturing environment, you know, to get out of this mess, and a lot of it is back to the silver tsunami. Is a lot of those folks that have lived through this aren't signing up and stepping up to move the needle in this direction. It's the next generation's problem, right? Let them deal with it, you know, versus bulldoze the plant, start all over, greenfield, brownfield, whatever. We're going to start all over, but you have to have capital investment to do that, right?
But it's easier to take that old, antiquated new equipment and say, you know what? I have to have this. I'm going to buy it. It is what it is. But your network can be micro segmented off. You can protect that asset from all the other traffic and still secure it in a way that's appropriate if you have that knowledge internally or with a SI or whatever. But you can't just ignore the fact that it's put on the plant day one and riddled with vulnerabilities, because that just isn't the answer.
Well, that's what you have to have a collaborative effort, right? Because, we've witnessed, it still happens today, a plant who is trying to follow some IT policy or governance activity, like, for example, remote access. And if it becomes too cumbersome, too problematic, too bureaucratic to get in, they will skirt around that in a heartbeat, put in their own remote access, working with whoever they're trying to get in there, and bypass IT altogether. Right? Because that $80,000 an hour, $1 million a day, whatever it is, I'm not waiting for the people that are dragging their feet who don't care whether this vendor who can help me fix my drive problem can get access in the next couple of weeks. No, I need them in there now.
Well, again, if I'm in Italy and my choice is get on a plane, schedule it, and get over there, that may be 3 or 4 days at your point, $1 million a day or whatever that number is. That doesn't work for the plant. Here's your access right now. Come into my network, do what you got to do, diagnose it, figure it out. I don't care what the consequences are to my security hygiene. Here you go, open port, come do what you want to do.
Right. Well, then that's the difference, like I said earlier, centralized IT, decentralized OT. How does you get IT to start acting more like the decentralized model? Which means you have to be ingrained, has to be a significant amount of collaboration, a relationship in there that's trusted and valuable, and you're accountable for that $1 million a day loss because of your inactions or your actions, right? Because that's the way the plant people look at it. That's them, right? They get comped on that. That's how they get paid. That's how they get the bonuses, whatever, being safe and being able to generate revenue the most effective, efficient way as possible. So how do you get IT into that model and not sit in some ivory tower trying to dictate where they'll just shut you off and ignore you? They'll do the minimal, but when it really comes to control, to the assets that you don't have your hands on, IT, that you don't manage or support, they're going to do what they need to do to be successful.
And we see that all the time, from bringing in completely separate ISPs into the plant because they're told you don't get internet access. They just drop it in, they pull it up across the board. So,
and that's where I think IT needs to broaden their partnership arrangement and try to find out who is operating and running in my plants. Right? Because one plant on the East Coast is going to have a different set of operators handling your plants on the West Coast, right? From an OT ecosystem perspective, right? And so you're going to have to build bridges and relationships and partnerships and try to find out who these folks are that are working in your plants, because they're the ones that can help you with your initiative. It's not going to be the plant guys. Because they don't have the skill, and they don't have the time, they don't have the resources, they don't have the budget per se. You're going to have to go to the folks that they really rely on to help them keep their plants running. If the problem with the plant bounces from tier 1 to tier 2, tier 3 support, after tier 1, you send out the mechanic or the electrician or some guy, that's running around with a toolbox. He goes, yeah, this is something else. And then it bounces up. Then you're into I got to go talk to the controls guy or get to the OEM guys. That's the gap that needs to be fixed right there. Right. And that's who IT needs to start going, who's working in my plants and programming this stuff and selling me this stuff and configuring it and helping me maintain it and determining what firmware is running on it, what operating system's on it, what software is running on it, all of these things. That's where IT's got to go from centralized to decentralized to be successful in these manufacturing environments.
No, totally agreed. It makes sense. And hopefully organizations are starting to take advice and do that. We've beat that horse and we've preached that sermon nonstop for 2 years already.
Yeah,
and it's beginning to get adoption, but not really.
Yeah, I mean, you question, if you're talking to the CIOs and the CISOs and you're having this dialogue, what are they thinking? right? What are they really thinking, from that context? How are they trying to manage that landscape to that extent? Because we work with the other side of the fence. We work with the OEMs and the system graders, not only our competitors and our colleagues and our peers, but that conversation is not being had to this day.
Some of them, I would say that message is being taken two ways. You got part of them that are saying, I hear you, but I'm not listening to you because my tools, technologies, I'm smarter than you. I can figure this out. And then you got some that are like, I've not thought of it that way. That's interesting. And they really, honestly, truly want to learn and want to make a difference and really want to help the situation. Those are the ones that where we see successes versus that round peg, square hole mentality of, I can do this with my own tools, and they really can't.
No, it goes back to what I said earlier. Who's responsible for cybersecurity in the manufacturing plant? Everyone. And we've been doing this long enough to know, we've witnessed it. We've seen these tools. You talked about Armis and their growth, and we've seen their tool in action. We've seen their tool in the field for years. And every time we walk into a manufacturer that's been using their stuff or their competitor's stuff, they're seeing less than half the assets that manufacturer has. So what's the point? What's the point of the fact that you bought an OT tool that's seeing half your OT assets or a third, and there's no actionable stuff coming out of it, from the events and the alerts, how you organize and how you prioritize and how you tackling the events that are being uncovered in your plant, who owns it, who's resolving it,
But I don't know if that's a tool issue. That's more of a process issue.
Yeah, it's not a tool issue. You're right. Yeah. It's not a tool issue.
The tools can absolutely pick up the assets, but if it's just dropped in at an IDF or core backbone, you're only going to see nothing.
It's people and process.
Totally agree.
It's not the technology. It's just people and process.
But you're right. They're not making the effort, is what I would say.
Well, I would say they don't know how to make the effort, right? Meaning that it's not a game that they know how to play because they don't play it every day. They play it in the enterprise.
Correct.
And they've been at it for a while, chasing printers and servers and applications and laptops, networks. But then you got a whole other set of assets within your environment that you don't touch, you don't work with every day.
And you're not familiar with, and you don't understand the process behind them.
Right. You weren't even behind the decision-making process of what control systems it was bought. Back to your example with the machine out of Italy, right? Yep. I guarantee IT wasn't part of that conversation. That was some plant team that went out there and reviewing, gas cheese shaker can makers and going, these guys in Switzerland got the best one we've seen. Let's just buy that. And it shows up running Windows XP, and I'm plugging it into the network. Running around as an IT executive saying, get that off of my network as a non-starter.
Yeah.
You can say that all you want, back to your responsibility and authority, but that machine stays because if that machine's not running, this plant's not running, and that's going to cost me $1 million a day.
It's a it's a revenue thing. It's, my assets, regardless of new, old, antiquated, whatever, make the revenue for the business. And without them, there is no business. So how do you have that marriage? How does that look as, you go back to the topic of, as these aging workforces are taking that knowledge away, how do they fix this and try and bring that in and resolve part of that issue?
Well, there's a lot of paths, right? There's AI, there's virtual. The technology can solve a lot of those challenges that you're talking
especially
about.
The repetition.
That requires investment. Right. Back to the capital spend, right? I got to move from a 25-year-old piece of equipment where I got to do recontrol or put in a new piece of equipment that has more state-of-the-art technology with cybersecurity built in, right? I mean, we talk about this. Think about organizations that have bought a tool like Armis, have had it for years. We're out there building packaging lines for them, building the panels, designing and building the panels, and they're not putting Armis technology down around that new packaging line.
They need to put it in every single panel they replace or build, period.
Yeah. It's like you just forewent all your security protocols that you've been driving somewhere within the organization, and you're not putting in this new $20 million packaging line that you're building that's going to have a dozen panels wrapped around it with a dozen, 20 PLCs.
Yeah.
From start to finish of, packaging and filling cans or bottles of your product.
Yep. Right.
And you got no visibility. You have no visibility into it whatsoever. And it's like, why?
Right.
And it's not a matter of if you get hit, it's a matter of when you get hit. And you will.
It's coming.
Yep.
It's absolutely coming. Well, great conversation, Dino. I think that, definitely
it's time
something
for me to retire. I got the gray hair for it.
You've got probably 20 more years, and then you can
That's
sunset.
Not true.
All right, I'll give you 18. We'll let you go when we're done. How's that sound?
All right.
All right. Have a great day, buddy.
See you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.